Hello, everyone. We're excited to be here with all of you. Good morning. And just want to thank these leaders, Diana, David, and Amy, for making some time to come and talk with all of you today. We're excited to discuss how corporations, government, nonprofits are able to cross-sector work together on collaborative partnerships. And what is important to keep in mind is that these partnerships don't just happen. They take a lot of planning. They take a lot of work to make sure that there's impact and that there are results. And these leaders here today are going to talk about the how and the why. They have some great case studies and examples to be able to share with you. And ultimately, to think through for all of you as you're thinking about what those partnerships could look like. So one area of note for CECP, Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, we are honored to work with these companies, and as noted, a couple of sponsors, Bank of America, Optum are affiliated with CECP, and so is US News. And so we're grateful for the work that these corporate leaders with their CEOs are taking on to be able to unleash the power of purpose. That is the work that CECP does to be able to support our companies, but that work that companies are doing around equity is both internal in their company and it's external in the communities and with other stakeholders that they're working with. None of it is easy, and what's important to keep in mind is that as these leaders are working through these strategies on collaborative partnerships, that they are always thinking around how is that benefiting both us and the stakeholders in the community. And so today we're going to allow you to be able to have a little peek inside of the corporations, talk through some of the honest discussions that happen inside of the companies, and grateful for these leaders sharing some of that information with us today. So each of your companies has examples of these partnerships that you've built, these collaborative ways to be able to advance equity. And would love for you to be able to talk about whether it's within your company or in your communities where you have your operations. Share a little bit about your current role in your company and how it specifically contributes toward advancing equity. So let's start with Amy.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Nakamoto. I'm with Discovery Education, and my answer is going to be a little nuanced for that, but just for those of you who don't know, Discovery Education is an education technology company. We were born out of what is now Warner Brothers Discovery 3 decades ago with this idea that content and experiences could do more than just entertain, that they could educate. And so the foundation of our company, and now we've been independent for many years, is how do you create experiences in the classroom that go outside of the 4 walls, of sort of the 4 traditional walls of learning, and provide students access and teachers access to those experiences. My role at Discovery Education, which is so critical to this conversation, is actually leading all of our social impact and corporate partnership work, which is essentially basically taking all of what's happening in the real world through foundations, companies, corporate philanthropy, and translating that into a way that students and educators can use instructionally in the classroom. So for us, equity and thinking about what does an equitable education in the K-12 landscape look like? It is around providing equitable resources. It's making sure that teachers are staying in their jobs in all different demographics of the public school system. And then how do we actually help our corporate partners translate their corporate missions and their corporate visions into equitable solutions for student learning? So for us, it's about our business model is built off of this. It is our ethos about what we think should happen for young people in the K-12 school system. And it's about what our partners' goals are in the classroom as well.
Great, thank you. David, do you want to share a bit?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here and good to be in a room full of folks who share some similar values and approaches. David Etzweiler, Siemens Foundation. Siemens Foundation is the corporate foundation of Siemens, and we focus exclusively on equity. So we focus in 3 areas. We focus on workforce training, in particular those jobs that require more than a high school degree, less than a college degree, and strong technical skills, because when we look at the research and we look at sustainable jobs that pay a living wage and that provide a floor to a career, not a ceiling to a career, that's one of the places that we went to very quickly. Similarly, in health equity, our primary focus is in workforce training. So we work with groups like the Washington Association of Community Health for national expansion of pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs in community clinics, medical assistants, dental assistants, and whatnot. And then most recently, our focus has been on the green economy. So there was conversation today about structural changes. We have a structural change in our economy these days, thanks to $1.5 trillion of investment through the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. That is a sea change of shift, and it creates tremendous opportunity and in fact need to include populations that our country has not done well before. And so that's where we are most heavily focused right now. We have a $30 million 10-year commitment through an initiative called Everyone Charging Forward. This is a recognition of the role that vehicles play, current vehicle demographics, if you will, play in the carbon producing market in the United States, and the role that electric vehicles can play in that, and an understanding that when you look at the workers needed to manufacture, install, and service electric vehicle chargers, that we are woefully behind in terms of the numbers of folks that we have. And then when you break down the research and you look at who now is in that electrical or electrician market or related job field, it is overwhelmingly older white males. And we just have not done a very good job of including other folks, women in particular, about 3 to 4% of that population. Folks of color are just a little better at 4 to 6 percentage points of that population. So we are heavily focused right now in making sure that we have an inclusive workforce, and that folks who have not been included understand that these jobs exist, number one, understand what that bridge into workforce training is, and have the supports needed to ensure that they continue on in their training and beyond.
Great. Diana.
Good morning, everybody. So happy to be here and part of the conversation. As you heard, I head corporate social responsibility for Sanofi in the US, and my team's really responsible for elevating Sanofi's societal commitments and bringing them to life, one of which is health equity and a key focus for us. I'm going to actually share a little bit about one of our long-term key partnerships, and I'll probably touch upon it maybe in some of the other questions as well. But that's with the National Association of Community Health Workers, or NASHWA, much shorter to say. It's a workforce that we've believed in a long time, and Sanofi, along with a number of companies, was responsible for helping to form them into an official 501c3 back in 2019. But in 2021, we had two problems that we were trying to solve. The first was, how do we create a workforce of purpose-driven employees who are health equity advocates and understand how the work that they do every day plays a role in solving some of these issues? And secondly, how do we help those in under-resourced communities get access to the care and the resources that they certainly have a right to? We believe community health workers are essential in making that happen, and they're essential because they come from the very same communities that we're trying to reach. They're not without their challenges, however. They're often working outside the health system. They don't have many of the same rights and benefits as other healthcare workers, including reimbursement for their services. So we sat down with NASHWA and talked about our goals and objectives, how we might be able to work together. And one of the things that we asked them is, what are your pain points? What's getting in the way of you being able to have the greatest impact that you'd like to have? And they identified workforce capacity and lack of being able to communicate en masse, which we certainly saw during the pandemic. After much conversations, we ultimately developed a program that we called our Employee Innovation Challenge. And this was a program with about 200 employees who volunteered their time over roughly 3 months, helping Nashua build a roadmap for their first ever digital platform. And this will have information on data sharing and benchmarking and training and policies, but ultimately it will unify the workforce for the first time across the country. So much more to come on that. It actually launches in the next 2 weeks. It took longer to build than we had hoped, about 2 years. In the meantime, we had been working with them on policy and reimbursement issues, training them for Capitol Hill days, how do you advocate for the workforce in legislative meetings, and so much more. So just a start into that, and a great partnership moving forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So when each of your companies are thinking through why you're setting up these partnerships, there's a motivation behind it. So can you talk a little bit about that motivation and also how you're defining equity in the framework of that collaborative partnership? And David, can you go first?
Yeah, good. Then let me flip those just and address the equity kind of definition first and foremost. And we certainly nobody's going to accuse us of being overly academic in our definition of equity, but I really think it goes back again to some of the things that we've heard on this panel and earlier. You know, we really believe in a level playing field. We understand that lots of folks in our economy don't understand there's a playing field that exists, let alone how to get there and how to stay there. And so that's, you know, a huge part. If you looked at our initiatives across the board, you would see that built into all of our approaches going forward. And in terms of our approach, we really focus on these 4 intersecting circles that we come back to over and over and over again, where we think we find the highest return on investment for society. We look at the big social issues of the day, again, income and wealth disparity, the effect on democracy, sort of in the social impact space. In the southern circle, if you will, we look at community assets, and so that's part of that partnership conversation that I'll mention in a moment. But we also look at the corporate assets that we have as well. Money is certainly part of it as a foundation, but I have to say it's a small part of the assets that corporations have to bring to society. So it's our leadership, it's our German heritage that understands work-based learning and pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship models, our customers and competitors models and networks, our relationships with Department of Labor, Commerce, and many others that we bring to bear. And then the final circle that we really look at are the traditional space where the foundation has led in terms of technical jobs and youth. And so we bring all those together. In terms of, you know, what we're looking for in partnerships, you know, I think we start with a very straightforward, and maybe I should apologize for this, but I won't, the corporate approach to management, right? We look at vision, strategy, structure, and tactics, very much blocking and tackling. And we certainly start out as we develop our initiatives with some ideas, some theories of change, how the world works and how it should change. But we quickly enter into conversations with the partners that we have to test those, to pressure test those, to have push back with real life data and experiences involved in all of that. And so that's really the start of the partnership. But I think inherent in the question is an understanding that each initiative that you have is going to have different needs for partnership. And I think that's part of what we unpack as well, right? Sometimes we're going to other funders because we realize we're one small part of the funding scenario. And what we really want to do is spread models out nationally. That's one of the things that we do. So we look to who else is influential in this work, again, not only with money, but also with brand and influence. When it comes to our partners in the community, we have a lot of conversations before we land on our partners, and we look at what they've accomplished. We look at who's staffing from an equity standpoint. Do they have an inclusive staff? Do they have an inclusive board? Do they have data that says, yes, they actually are getting things done? And tracking workforce participants in terms of increases in wages, for example, in terms of sustained jobs, in terms of providing supports that are needed to bring folks into the workforce and maintain them there. I'll stop there. I could go on for a while, but that's just a few thoughts.
Great, thank you. Diana?
Sure. I mean, I'll just say first, I think we all can agree that no one person or company or entity is going to solve all of the equity issues out there. And of course, they're so vast. And in my view, the only way we're going to move the needle is through partnership and collaboration. When I look at our Nashua partnership, we look to them as a partner because they had a level of expertise that we simply did not have. They're the boots on the ground working in the very communities that we're trying to help. And quite honestly, many CHWs are also facing the same barriers that they're trying to help others overcome. So for us, it was not being afraid to acknowledge that there was just stuff we didn't know. I think that's one of the key things in any partnership. And then ultimately, you want to make sure that who you're choosing as a partner can not only fill in those gaps, but add the insights to really make your partnership a robust and a well-rounded one. In terms of really equitable collaboration, I would say one of the keys here is ensuring that upfront you have decided what each of you want to achieve separately, what you want to achieve together, who's going to do what, who's going to measure what. Because I think when you have all of that set up front, everybody's very clear on who's responsible for what. It's truly when you can have an equitable partnership.
Great. Thank you. Amy?
So I'm going to approach this a little bit differently because I think the work that these two companies do is so commendable and we've been partners in the past and currently. One of the things that sets these two companies apart, and I think this goes into sort of motivation and what makes equity, is long-term support. And somebody asked me in my job, which is again working with companies and education, how do you work on education, impact in education, which is a many decades effort, with companies who are looking at quarterly returns as their metric of performance and success, and how do you balance those two things? And part of the motivation in partnership is looking for those partners who understand that it's a long game when you're talking about equitable solutions in things like health or health equity or education and K-12 or workforce development. So my motivation in this work and partnerships is that there are so many organizations out there focused on workforce development and have these incredible initiatives. Yet a study just last year said that still 75% of high school students don't have an idea of what their college or career post-secondary pathway is. So until those things come together, all these amazing corporate initiatives and programs and purpose-driven approaches to community match with how a school system is building their environment to support that. Everyone is motivated to do that, but I don't think, and I'll speak on behalf of the K-12 school systems, we're not set up that way. If I'm a teacher every day and my job is to teach physics to 11th grade students, it is not my job to go out and figure out what are the hundreds of opportunities for my students from a corporate pathways perspective. So our motivation at Discovery Education is to help bridge that, is to help make it really digestible for people in schools who are working with young people to understand the multitude of not only programs and opportunities, but even to present a different face. We saw this about 5 years ago, 6 years ago now. We were getting a lot of inbound requests from teachers, and we have partnerships with about 70% of K-12 public school districts in this country. We're getting a lot of inbound requests saying, we need to talk about STEM careers. Former President Obama brought multiple companies to the White House to talk about the STEM job skills gap in the late 2000s. So we're having these conversations in these silos. So it's only through partnership where we can paint the picture for educators to say, this is what the inside of a clinical trial looks like. This is what the inside of a modern day manufacturing plant looks like, to show those students. And so I think it's only through partnership that you can do that. And the motivation is that the gap is still there. Students still don't know what they want to be or how to get there. And companies are doing so much better and more consistent work to do that. So until we get there, we haven't reached equity.
Thank you. So collaborative partnerships require everyone bringing their best self forward and navigating power dynamics. And that's really hard to do, to build trust, to make sure that marginalized voices are heard, and respected, and people are able to all bring their best selves to forming what that partnership looks like. So would love for you all to talk a little bit about how you ensure all the stakeholders that you're working with in your collaborative partnerships around advancing equity, how those make sure that you're actively engaging and that everyone's voices are heard. And then if you have any advice on what not to do, mention that also. Yeah. So let's start with Diana. Yeah.
Sure. I think this is a really important question. Sanofi, as well as most pharmaceutical companies, always work to keep the patient at the center of everything that they do. But I think when you start talking about health equity, it's about so much more, and it's really about the human experience. Just to go back to Nashua for a minute, it was really important as we were building the innovation journey to keep two things in mind. One was that the CHW voice and lived experience had to be at the center of that program. And by the way, that lived experience is very different depending on your culture and where you live and so much more. But we also had to admit that we were not the expert on their needs. They were. And without their voice, the platform, nor would the goals and objectives we're trying to achieve be nearly as successful. In terms of power dynamics, I think for us in that particular relationship, and it's not always easy, but in that one it was fairly easy because I think we had some expertise that they needed as well. But as long as we designed a program where our employees felt that they were really working on something meaningful and that was leading to something that could be so impactful in the communities we were trying to serve, we knew enough to take a step back and ensure that the CHW's voice was being heard and understood. I will say, interestingly enough, when we started that partnership, there was some pushback from the CHWs involved. We had actually helped Nashua form an advisory board for the program, and it was made up of a number of entities, someone from the CDC and Indian Health Services, and mainly CHWs from around the country. And we got some initial pushback as, hey, why is Sanofi involved? You know, why are they telling us what to do? And of course, we didn't approach the partnership as if we were telling them what to do. But I think by the time the first 3 months were up, we felt like we had been through something incredibly profound. And I think the respect and understanding that we gained for what each party brings to the table really helped shape our partnership moving forward.
Thank you. Amy.
So one of the things that we drive our work with is what I'll sort of call like a prime directive. And to me, that is, what does the teacher think, or what does the student think about a partnership? And so to go to the power dynamic component, I always think we've talked to a couple companies where they'll say, well, we want to be the only company to do this in the community. And then I'm listening kindly. I'm like, okay, great. Then I think to myself, or I go to one of our educators and say, well, what if I said to you that this is the only company, and then literally a teacher would be like, I can't deal. Because I can't deal with companies or philanthropy arguing with each other about who gets credit for the thing when I'm sitting here every day trying to educate my young person. So Amy and team help figure that out for the company. So I think the power dynamics exist in places where it sometimes just doesn't even matter. Because at the end of the day, and again, this is talking about education and K-12 education, people don't have time. The urgency of what's happening in a classroom is of the moment. Teachers have very limited time to dedicate to their planning or to their work, and administrators are dealing with so many different things. So, you know, and it's maybe not a friendly approach sometimes, but my approach and our approach is that we don't have time for you to argue with each other about who gets credit for what, because at the end of the day, if students need access to high quality content, they need access to high quality content, and whoever's gonna work together, that's who we wanna work with. If you're gonna work together with community, with teachers, with school districts, great, we'll work with you. But if you're gonna make this conversation, but first, we need to make sure that our company's represented this way, like, I just don't have time. So that's our approach.
Perfect. Thank you. And so you can see this is really easy. And all of you shared some challenges and obstacles. Is there anything else that any of you want to add a little around overcoming challenges that you've experienced?
I mean, first of all, I would agree wholeheartedly with what Diana and Amy have said, and I would say that, you sort of led into the question with bringing your best self, and I think that's the starting point for all of this, right? Like making sure your own house is in order, that your staff and board understand where you're going, that you understand the difficulty of working, in partnership, et cetera. So I think that's a huge part of all of this. And then as you get into the partnerships, vetting yourself and being vetted, right? So looking at lots and lots of different partners and saying, what is their approach? How do they partner with others? What's their reputation? What are their results? And beginning those conversations and hoping that they pressure test you, that they push back on you and say, yeah, let me just help you out with that one. That doesn't really work that way. I'm thinking of one of our grantees in Detroit who, when we sat down, we flew out and sat down with the IBEW, with MUST and EVITP, these partners. And they taught us so much in the course of an hour and a half. But part of what they talked about are, really emphasizing the types of stressors that folks have, kind of obvious, right, to folks in this room, but something that we probably didn't focus on as much as we should have. How do you get transportation to a job? If you're working at Starbucks and you want to get trained, but you're not being paid to train, how do you get that compensation? How do you deal with childcare if it's your sister's brother who takes care of the kids, but sometimes that's a little sporadic, right? So being able to put your own ignorance out there, I think, is really important. A certain amount of humility in that, and also kind of listening for some of that as well from your partners.
Great, thank you. Anyone want to add anything else? Yeah.
I think the thing that I would add, and it's so hard when you look at and I'll use the word that the earlier panel used, systemic barriers or systemic opportunities everywhere, is to make sure the scope of what you want to approach and tackle is doable. And I think about this all the time in education, because we'll have conversations around teacher shortage, teacher retention, obviously the performance, like where we are with the student learning in general is just so Herculean of a thing. Then you look at digital equity, and you have all these things that you can do. And I think one of the barriers to overcome is being laser focused on the thing that you think you can tackle at the time you think you can tackle with the partners you can tackle with. Because if we all try and do peanut butter approach, it doesn't work. So to really focus on, if you're gonna move the needle systemically, what is the thing or what are the approaches, and just go after it and almost eliminate some of the other noise, which is so hard because it's very hard to say, well, we can't tackle digital equity right now, but I want to go back to another concept, because there is intersectionality. So it is about finding those organizations or those coalitions or those other collaborators that are tackling those and making sure you're partnered with those, but you don't have to be in everything. And I think that's probably the hardest thing to edit ourselves, but also ensure for truly systemic change, is to be really focused, and then to find other groups that are really focused on other components and making sure you're building in that intersectionality.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add to one obstacle that I think happens with a number of partners is that your time and your perception of time is never your own once you start bringing other partners to work for, particularly if you're working with an NGO or a nonprofit organization where resources might be a little constrained and they might have other challenges. It's why I think it's so important, again, I go back to touching on this earlier, that you make very clear up front who's responsible for what and on what timeline, because inevitably if something comes up, and it always does, that's sort of something you're not planning on, hopefully your entire program will not be derailed. But one other thing I just want to say is that partnerships are just that. It takes two to tango, and sometimes 3, 4, and 5 to tango. And I think if you approach a partnership with listening and patience and respect, you really can overcome just about any barrier.
Great, thank you. Great answers. So as you reflect on your partnerships that you've had, there are specific strategies that I'm sure you each would say were really successful and provided a lesson learned go forward. Could you share a few examples of what those strategies are? You've shared a number of them already, but any others come to mind? Any of you? You want to go?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, so one of the things I'll just pick up from what Diana was saying is about listening. So we all have everyone has a boss, right? Everyone has a boss. And so I think one of the things that when we think about partnerships is understanding what is the value that each partner, and within that partner, each stakeholder needs to be true for them. So if we think about an education system, what a teacher needs and identifies as the most critical supports they need in the classroom may be a little bit different voiced by the head of instruction for the district or the chief equity officer at the district, which may be a little bit different than what the superintendent might think is the most critical thing. So I think one of the things in partnerships, and then if you think about the other side of it in terms of our world, is you have that same sort of stack ranking of what your day-to-day contact needs to be true, what the CEO of a company needs to be true, what the head of a foundation needs to be true. So I think one of the tips and things that we always try to think about in partnerships is to understand every stakeholder's motivation and value along the way, because how you start a partnership and then 6 months later or 2 years later, the intention of what those understandings are by each of those stakeholders is different. So you can't just focus here on the ground. You have to focus with all the different stakeholders because they're getting inputs from everywhere, right? Our environment, our economy, everything. So I think our biggest learning and what we try to instill is that partnerships are happening on the ground, but how they are felt and how they are heard and how they are effective go within all spaces of the organization, and it's on us as partners to be responsible for listening at all those levels. So whether that's a quick coffee with a superintendent to understand their next year's priorities, or an annual summit with your partners to say, are we on the right track? Is this hitting the goals that you all have intended? I think those are the sort of the critical learnings we've had.
Great, thank you. David.
I was just thinking a little bit about a mentor that I had when I was younger who almost wrote some words on the inside of my forehead. We were working on a strategic plan for the company, global citizenship plan, and brought a number of the findings together. And he said to me, you have the vision, now you have to turn it over to others so they can give it back to you, right? And I think in terms of our approach and the approach of folks that I've seen do partnerships well, that's really at the source of it, right? Like you have some good ideas, you're dealing with this authentically, but how do you get everybody's fingerprints on it? How do you get everybody's feedback on early on, not when it's not when you've finalized it and put it in ink, right? And certainly one of the examples that we're most proud of, I would say, is with New America, the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, which is a coalition of many funders at this point, but it goes back 7 or 8 years ago that we started some of that work with research. It was $200,000 or $250,000 worth of research, but one of the things we said with them early on, and they certainly agreed, was let's think past this. Let's think about what we need to do to build a coalition to get other people's feedback and buy-in in this, to make sure that we're not missing anything. And that approach that they took was really a winning approach. I mean, it's now Gates and Carnegie and Lumina and so many other funders who are a part of that and spreading apprenticeships out across the country with technical assistance and whatnot. Again, it kind of goes back to that, handing the vision over to others.
Great, thank you. Diana.
Yeah, David, you said 2 words earlier, humility and listening. And for me, those are absolutely critical. If you go into a partnership assuming you know all and it's sort of my way or the highway, it's not really a partnership. I'll share just really quickly an incredible learning I had at a former company. It's a story I'm almost embarrassed to tell, but I think it's an important one because it's shaped how I work with every partnership or collaboration today. At my former company, we were trying to address the high incidence of diabetes among the Native American population. And there was a particular reservation in South Dakota that we were looking to work with. And we had gotten a meeting and with the tribal leadership and the leadership of the Indian Health Board. And my colleague and I had, donned our suits and our heels and our briefcases. And we had gone out to the reservation and kind of addressed this meeting by saying, you've got an issue, we know how to solve it, we're going to tell you what to do. And at the same time, we did very little cultural sensitivity training to be prepared. So you can imagine, I'm hearing from the snickering, you can imagine the kind of reception we met with. Well, it took us about 2 years to gain the trust of the tribe. And we did it by continuing to show up, go back, really try to prove to them that we were very authentic in what we were trying to do, and we weren't just doing it for the sake of doing it. But we also stepped back and listened. We soaked up as much knowledge as we could. We took cultural sensitivity training. We taught our colleagues who came out to the reservation cultural sensitivity training. But most importantly, we sort of stepped back and let the tribe take the lead. And I'm happy to say that it's been about 13 years since that initial meeting, and although I'm no longer with the company, the program is still thriving, and it's actually expanded to 6 other reservations. So definitely, not only one of the most meaningful experiences of my entire career, but probably one of the most significant learning experiences I've ever had that I carry with me in every partnership I work with.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So, to our audience members who want to initiate partnerships with companies, collaborate around advancing equity, any final words of wisdom and advice for anyone? That something you haven't shared yet? And let's start with David. Let's go you first.
Sure. I think this concept of trust is sort of at the heart of the last of the conversation that we've been having here. I'm thinking about a conversation we had with Choose Healthy Life, a coalition of Black ministers based in New York, but working nationally to ensure healthcare and in their congregations. We reached out to them during COVID as we saw a vaccine being developed, and there was really horrible data that was out there that was looking at the uptake of that vaccine in Black communities. And as we sat down with clergy there, one of the clergy said, "We are a paranoid people, and with good reason," right? Understanding how communities have been treated, understanding the lack of the trust, understanding folks have been studied, and never to see results or anybody return again, right? So I think this concept of trust is maybe one we could have spent more time on. I think Diana certainly talked about that, but you do move at the speed of trust. It's cliche, but it's true. It's cliche for a reason.
Great, thank you. Amy?
Yeah, I would just double down on what I was saying earlier, which goes hand in hand with trust, is just consistency and staying power. I think, especially in partnerships, because it does take many to tango. But what we're talking about today and what this whole summit about is about long-standing, many years entrenched into how our society functions. And that does not go away or get resolved or evolve in a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. So I think thinking through a partnership, your partnerships don't have to be many years, but your focus and your intention does, because how you impact equitable solutions or access is not going to be an overnight thing. And so I think going in with a mindset of like this, this is going to take many years, and this is kind of our part in that many-year journey is okay to say, but stick in it longer than, a year or 2 years. I think that's probably the biggest thing I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, just 3 quick things. I think the first thing is before you go into any partnership or there's any problem you're addressing that you're trying to solve within your organization, it's important to make sure that it's fully aligned with your overall company's mission and goals. Because if it is, chances are that the resources needed, whether it's funding or time or human capital, will be around for the long term. And that really helps to create a sustainable partnership. The other thing I'd say too is find your allies within your organization. Look for people who you can turn to for help, but also provide an objective point of view. And lastly, I say do your research. Not all partnerships are created equal. And I think you really want to make sure before you're halfway down the road and it's too late to stop, that you really have done all of your homework in ensuring that the partnerships and collaborations that you're creating are ones that are really going to be sustainable.
Great. Thank you all very much. And I will just say that the companies that we're working with are always evolving their corporate purpose. They're always working to improve. And so you may have an idea around changing the world. They may have ideas around changing the world. But to remember that every company has a workforce. Every company has products and services, and they're continually assessing how they change and they evolve. And there just may be an idea that you have around how to connect with the amazing work that they're doing, and that they can find ways to be able to support you through employees. It could be product, it could be a grant, it could be other ways to really bring the full enterprise of a company forward. So encourage you all to seek your corporate partnerships, and I would love it if you could please thank these leaders here for the great work that they're doing in this country. Thank you.